At my beloved son's wedding, his fiancée shouted at me, "You weren't invited. Get out of here. You're embarrassing us." After that, I canceled all the payments I had made for the wedding, and what happened next shocked even me. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments the city you are watching from so that I can see how far my story has spread. My name is Brad Galligan. I'm 70 years old and I live alone in a creaky old Victorian house nestled in a quiet English village in Suffolk. It's the kind of place where the fog clings to the ground like old memories, and the chimney smoke curls lazily into the gray skies. Megan, my late wife, used to call it our forever home. She loved the stained glass windows, the ivy-covered walls, and the ancient oak tree in the garden that shed golden leaves in autumn. She's been gone 8 years now. Lung cancer took her quietly, as if afraid to disturb the peace. Since her passing, the house has been too silent. I talk aloud sometimes, not because I'm going senile, but because silence feels heavier than words. My days follow a slow, comforting rhythm: a walk around the garden, breakfast at the old pine table, a bit of reading by the fire, and sometimes fixing things: clocks, radios, memories. Harry, my only son, started drifting away after Megan died. We used to be close. He'd call every weekend, bring Max over for long visits, help me with the heavier tasks. But somewhere between his divorce and his career, we lost that connection. It wasn't a dramatic falling out. No shouting, no slammed doors, just space. Space that widened with time. I understood, in a way. People grow, change. Grief transforms us all differently. Harry buried himself in work, then in his new life. And I remained. The Victorian house became my cocoon, a relic to match its occupant. Harry stopped asking me for advice, stopped dropping in. His visits dwindled to birthdays and Christmas, and even then, they felt more like obligations than reunions. It hurt. Of course it hurt, but I never said anything. A father shouldn't beg for his child's attention, should he? The only light in that fog was Max, my grandson. 14 now, all wild hair and 2 big sneakers. He comes over twice a month, helps me with my phone, shows me funny videos, and talks about things I barely understand. AI, skateboarding, veganism. Through Max, I learn about the world. Through Max, I feel seen. He doesn't pity me. He doesn't talk down. He just is. Max is the only reason I haven't completely shut myself away. He brings laughter and the smell of energy drinks into the house, and I don't mind. Through him, I've learned to text properly, use Netflix, and understand TikTok. Though I still think the dances are absurd. It was on one of these visits, on a Sunday that smelled like rain and fresh scones, that Max dropped the bomb. "Oh, didn't Dad tell you?" he said casually while helping me set up a Bluetooth speaker. "He's getting married again." In August, I think I blinked. "Married?" "Yeah, to Julia. She's all right, I guess. Works in event planning or something." I stood there holding the speaker in my hands like it was an artifact. I didn't know. Max looked uncomfortable. "He probably meant to tell you. He's been busy with work and stuff." I nodded, but my heart sank. Harry was getting married. Again. And I heard about it from his teenage son. The last time I'd spoken to Harry, we discussed lawn treatments and his upcoming trip to Devon. Nothing about a fiancé or a wedding. Still, I smiled for Max. "That's good news. Your dad deserves happiness." "Yeah?" Max said, then frowned. "You'll be coming, right?" "Of course," I said, though in that moment, I wasn't so sure. After he left, the house felt colder than usual. I sat in Megan's old chair and stared out the window. It wasn't the wedding that unsettled me. It was the way I'd been left out. Again. In the following weeks, I tried to keep myself busy. I polished every piece of silver in the house. I trimmed the roses. I even went to the pub, something I hadn't done in over a year. But no call came from Harry. No official invitation arrived in the post. And slowly, a gnawing doubt began to form in my chest. What if I wasn't meant to be there at all? I thought of Megan often during that time. She had been the glue. She understood people, could smooth over tension with a smile and a well-timed joke. Had she been alive, none of this would have happened. Harry adored her. We both did. I found myself standing at the window some evenings, watching the shadows stretch across the garden, listening for a car that never came. The world was moving forward without me. And worse, my own son seemed to prefer it that way. Then one day, Max texted, "Hey Granddad, got fitted for my tux today. Wedding's gonna be fancy. You excited? Excited?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a thumbs-up emoji, the way he'd taught me. And so, the day crept closer. Still no invitation. Still no word from Harry. Just silence, punctuated by my heartbeat and the whisper of Megan's voice in my mind, telling me to stay dignified, to be patient. But dignity, I would learn, has limits. And when the day finally arrived, when I donned my best suit, tied the tie Megan had gifted me on our 40th anniversary, and walked into the venue with hope in my chest, what happened next would shatter more than my pride. It would fracture something deeper. And within an hour of the bride's shriek, her finger pointed like a dagger, my life would take a turn so sharp, so final, it would leave everyone in that hall stunned. Especially me. It was a Thursday morning in late June when Max came by unexpectedly. I was in the garden pruning roses when I heard the familiar squeak of his bicycle brakes outside the gate. "You're early," I said, wiping my hands on a towel as he leaned his bike against the fence. "School holiday?" He nodded, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Yeah, but that's not why I came. I need to talk to you." Something in his tone made me pause. Max wasn't the kind of boy who came bearing news unless it weighed on him. We settled on the porch with lemon biscuits and tea. He barely touched his. "It's about Dad," he said at last, staring into his cup, "and Julia." "Lawrence, right?" I said. "Julia Lawrence?" "Yeah," Max sighed. "He's going to ask you for help." With the wedding, I said nothing for a moment. The birds chirped in the distance, indifferent. "He needs money," Max continued. "He doesn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know before he drops it on you. Julia's insisting on this big wedding at some countryside estate with a live jazz band and ice sculptures. Dad says it's going to cost a fortune." I chuckled softly, not because it was funny, but because it was so expected. "Your father's always had a talent for dreaming big when someone else is footing the bill." Max frowned. "So you knew?" "I've been financing his fresh starts since university," I said gently. "His first flat, his first business, the divorce lawyer, and now his second wedding." "I suppose it's tradition." Max looked apologetic. "I didn't want you to feel used." "I don't," I lied. "I did, but not because of the money. Because the truth is, I had hoped this wedding might be a turning point, that maybe, by helping Harry one last time, I could rebuild a bridge between us, one that Megan would have wanted mended. If money was the ticket back into my son's life, maybe it was worth paying. The next day, as predicted, Harry called. "Dad," he said, voice all friendly cheer, "listen, about the wedding." I let him speak. He talked about guest lists, venues, custom menus, how Lawrence had connections in high places but needed that financial cushion to make her vision reality. Not once did he ask how I was doing. When he finally paused, I said, "All right, I'll help." There was a brief silence. "Really? That's great, Dad. Thank you. I knew I could count on you." He sounded relieved, almost surprised. I imagined him in his office, spreadsheet open, already subtracting figures from my savings in his head. "I'd like to meet her," I said. "Lawrence?" "Of course. She'll be thrilled." We agreed on Sunday, lunch at a restaurant they frequented, apparently upscale but casual. I wore a blazer Megan had once insisted made me look less like a grandfather and more like an editor, and arrived 5 minutes early, as always. They showed up 10 minutes late. Harry hugged me, an awkward, brief thing, and then Lawrence leaned in, air-kissed both sides of my face with a practiced smile. "Brad, I've heard so much about you," she said, sliding into her seat and checking her phone mid-sentence. She was tall, immaculately groomed, and dressed in soft beige tones that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her eyes flicked across the restaurant like she was scanning a stock report. Over lunch, I tried to understand her. I asked about her childhood, her interests. She steered every conversation back to the wedding, or real estate, or luxury travel. "I told Harry we need a wedding that feels like an investment," she said, sipping something sparkling. "First impressions matter, and this will set the tone for our future. We're even hiring a drone photographer," I smiled politely. "Do you love my son?" She paused, startled. "Of course. He's very supportive and ambitious." It was the tone of someone describing a business partner, not a life partner. Harry was quiet, chewing slowly. I wondered if he heard the hollowness in her words or just chose to ignore it. She barely asked me anything personal. Didn't inquire how I was managing a loan or how I'd been coping since Megan passed. Instead, she showed me fabric swatches, table layouts, and her Pinterest board. "I want a garden aisle, arch of white peonies, and we'll need lighting. Warm, but dramatic." "Of course," I said, half listening, my eyes on Harry. He looked tired, distracted. Or maybe that was just me seeing what I wanted to see. After the meal, as they drove off in her pristine white BMW, I stood on the curb a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't just the money. It was the feeling. The way Lawrence had looked at me, not as a man who'd buried his wife and raised a son, but as a potential investor, a sponsor, a benefactor. Not once had she asked me a personal question. Not once had she mentioned Megan or memories or meaning. I walked home slowly, the breeze tugging at my collar. Inside, the house felt even older than usual. The wallpaper seemed to sag, the floorboards groaned louder. That night, I poured a glass of scotch and sat in Megan's old armchair. I imagined her there, watching me with that quiet, knowing look. "Well," I said aloud, "looks like Harry's found himself a woman with taste." If ghosts could scoff, I swear she did. In the weeks that followed our lunch, the wedding plans moved into overdrive. Or at least, that's what I was told secondhand. From the outside, it all seemed like a grand production. Harry's voice, when he did call, was always full of strained enthusiasm. "Busy with catering meetings, Dad. Venue inspection this weekend. So much to coordinate. Always plural. We're planning, we've decided. But never would you like to join us?" At first, I excused it. Maybe they were sparing me the details. Perhaps they thought the whirlwind of floral arrangements and wine tastings wouldn't interest an old man with a bad knee. And maybe they were right. I wasn't asking to pick the napkin patterns. I just wanted to feel included. But slowly, it became obvious. I wasn't meant to be part of this wedding, not in any meaningful way. The first real sting came from Max. "They had a rehearsal dinner at the estate yesterday," he told me during a weekend visit. "You weren't there?" "No one told me," I said, keeping my voice even. "They had a table mock-up and everything. Julia's dad is giving a speech. Her mom's organizing a slideshow. They had a planner with a headset and everything." "And your father?" I asked. He was just nodding a lot. "Letting her run the show." Max paused. "I asked where you'd be sitting." Julia said she put you near the relaxed guest table, the quiet corner, you know? I didn't know, but I understood. The implication was clear. I wasn't family, not really. I was furniture, a sentimental artifact that they didn't know what to do with. They needed me for the funding, but not for the picture-perfect narrative. When the official invitation finally arrived in the post, weeks after Max's visit, I opened it slowly. A heavy envelope, cream with gold trim embossed with Lawrence's name above Harry's in elegant script. Inside, the seating plan diagram was tucked neatly beside a printed program. There it was. Table 14, beside the service entrance. I scanned the names. I didn't recognize a single one. No Max, no Harry, no cousins or neighbors. I had been placed with outliers, probably Lawrence's co-workers' spouses or distant guests who RSVP'd last minute. It was a kind of exile disguised in calligraphy. Still, I said nothing. 2 days later, I received an email from Lawrence's wedding planner. Dear Mr. Galligan, we noticed that your current suit may not match the wedding's visual palette. Kindly arrange for a navy or dove gray ensemble to align with the aesthetic guidelines. Thank you for understanding. I stared at the screen. The aesthetic guidelines. As if I were a curtain or a chair cover. My charcoal wool suit, the one Megan had picked with care, the one I wore to her funeral, was deemed unfit for their backdrop. A few hours later, Lawrence herself called. Brad, she said sweetly, I hope you don't mind about the color scheme. We're just trying to create harmony in the photos, I see. It's such a shame when someone stands out, you know? Distracts the eye, I was silent for a moment. If that's what you want, I'll sort it. Oh, wonderful. And if you need suggestions, I've sent links to a few shops. There's a Hugo Boss navy that's just divine. It would make you look much slimmer. I thanked her and hung up. That evening, I drove into Ipswich and bought a new suit. Navy blue. Slim fit. Not because I cared about harmony or aesthetics, but because I didn't want to be the reason for one more complaint. I folded my old suit carefully and placed it in the wardrobe next to Megan's shawl. The wool still smelled faintly of lavender. I hadn't worn it since her memorial. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. The new suit fit well enough, but it wasn't mine. Not really. It was something borrowed, something performed. I looked like a guest at someone else's celebration, which, I supposed, was exactly what I was. The week leading up to the ceremony blurred into a succession of messages and invoices. Lawrence's tone in her emails grew increasingly transactional, requests for final payments on the catering, the live quartet, and the chandelier garden tent she'd insisted on after seeing it in a bridal magazine. Dad, Harry said when I called to confirm the transfer, we really appreciate everything you're doing. I waited, hoping for more. A thank you with weight. A pause that showed he understood what it cost, not just in pounds but in pride. But he moved on quickly. Julia's parents are hosting the brunch on Sunday. You'll love their wine collection, no invitation to speak. No question about whether I'd like to say a few words at the reception. No mention of Megan. It was like she had never existed. The day before the wedding, I took a walk through the cemetery and left a single rose on Megan's grave. I sat on the stone bench and talked quietly, as I often did. I know you'd be kinder than I am about all this, I whispered. You'd tell me to be patient. To smile for Harry's sake. To just wear the bloody suit. The wind stirred the grass. I imagined her fingers brushing mine. I'm trying, I said, but I don't think they see me anymore. Not as a father, not as a person. The clouds above shifted, letting a sliver of sunlight through. I took it as her reply. Keep going, Brad. So I did. Even if it meant sitting at table 14 in a navy suit that wasn't mine, nodding politely among strangers while the sun I raise toasted a new family that barely acknowledged I existed. Still, I told myself, these are just details. A bad seat, an ugly tie, a missed rehearsal. These are things you can endure. Weddings are stressful. Maybe once the vows are exchanged, once the confetti falls and the wine flows, things will change. Maybe Harry would take a breath, find me in the crowd, and remember who I am. Not a decoration, not a formality, not a walking wallet. His father. The rehearsals began 2 weeks before the wedding, or so I learned through Max. They had another run-through yesterday, he said during a Sunday visit. Went over the ceremony order, speeches, timing, even how to pose for the drone camera shots. I paused mid-sip of tea. No one mentioned anything to me. Max looked uncomfortable. I thought you didn't want to be part of all that. I didn't say that. He nodded, frowning. I think they just assumed. Julia said you'd be happier relaxing at home. It was always Lawrence now, Julia said. Julia decided Julia prefers. Harry had become a quiet shape in his own wedding plans, a man shadowed by the force of his fiancée's ambitions. But it wasn't just rehearsals. My role in the entire event had become faint, spectral. I wasn't invited to the cake tasting, or the photo planning, or even the family blessing that took place the Sunday before. They gathered at Lawrence's parents' estate for what she called a pre-ceremony of unity, lighting candles and exchanging small gifts. There were dozens of photos on social media, Harry, Lawrence, Max, and her parents standing in a semicircle with hands clasped like a spiritual council. I wasn't in any of them. I wasn't told. Max only mentioned it in passing a few days later. They said it was mostly symbolic, he explained quickly, seeing my face change. Not official or anything. I see, I said, sipping my tea. Symbolic of what, I wonder? He didn't reply. The wedding website was updated with photos of the event. A quote from Lawrence's mother topped the page. We're so proud to be uniting our families in harmony and elegance. Our family wasn't mentioned. I wasn't mentioned. What was I then? A ghost? A checkbook? I tried to keep my dignity intact. I paid the bills on time. I asked no questions. I offered no opinions unless asked, which was increasingly rare. I even sent a gift to Lawrence's parents, a bottle of vintage wine with a handwritten card. They never acknowledged it. The tipping point came with the rehearsal dinner. Max texted me, "Are you coming to the dinner tomorrow?" They said it starts at 6. I blinked at the message, reading it twice. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known it was happening. I called Harry that evening. Oh, right. We assumed you'd just come to the wedding itself. The dinner's mostly for the bridal party. I see. You don't need to worry about speeches or anything, he added. We've got that sorted. No speech, no toast, no place on the stage. Just a seat in the corner with people who barely knew my name. I said nothing more and hung up. In the silence of my kitchen, I stared at the wall for a long time, my cup of tea growing cold beside me. Max came by 2 days later, wearing a suit jacket too big for him and a troubled look on his face. They made me practice the dance sequence for the entrance, he said, collapsing on the sofa. It's like a theater show. But no one told me you weren't invited. It's all right, I lied. It's not my day. Max glanced at me. It should still be your place. He was the only one who seemed to notice or care. At one point, he confronted his father. I overheard part of the conversation when I stopped by Lawrence's parents' home to drop off yet another check, this one for the lighting designer. Why isn't Grandpa part of anything? Max asked in the hallway. Harry's voice dropped to a whisper. Because he's difficult, Max. You don't understand. Difficult how? Always asking questions. Always watching like he's judging us. We just want things simple. He's your father. I know. But he makes everything heavy. The words lodged somewhere beneath my ribs. Heavy. I thought back to every time I'd nodded, smiled, paid, and stepped aside. What had I done to earn the label of burden? Had silence become too loud for them? Later that evening, Max and I walked through the village square. We stopped by the bakery, and he was quiet most of the way. Then he said softly, "They're wrong. You've done everything right." I didn't know what to say. I gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Max. That means more than you know." I wanted to believe it, but the mounting evidence said otherwise. When the final run-through came, the day before the wedding, I showed up early, just in case. I wore my new navy suit. I stood by the oak trees near the estate's garden archway, trying to look as though I belonged. I watched them all from a distance, Harry adjusting his tie, Lawrence laughing as she pointed to the musicians, her father rehearsing his speech like a seasoned politician. They didn't see me. No one did. After 15 minutes, I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply drove home, parked in the drive, and sat in silence in Megan's old chair. I closed my eyes and remembered a very different rehearsal, 35 years ago, when Megan and I had practiced our vows in the back of St. Mary's Chapel, giggling over forgotten lines and borrowed shoes. Harry was only 10 then, sitting in the front pew eating butterscotch, his eyes wide with pride. And now, here we were. I took a long breath. I told myself I would go. I would smile. I would sit at table 14 with strangers. I would wear the suit. I would be quiet. Not because I was weak, but because love, even when neglected, still clings to the hope that it might one day be returned. And I love my son, even if I no longer knew whether he still loved me back. The wedding day dawned pale and warm, the kind of English summer morning that tries to be hopeful. I woke early, shaved carefully, and put on the navy suit Lawrence had insisted upon. The collar pinched a little at the neck, but I ignored it. I wanted to look my best. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps somehow things would fall into place. I arrived at the estate an hour before the listed time, not because I was eager to eat canapes or sip champagne, but because I wanted to be helpful. There was always something that needed doing on a wedding day: a box to carry, chairs to straighten, guests to greet. The staff at the estate barely glanced at me as I stepped through the grand doors. I introduced myself to a woman with a clipboard and headset. She frowned, skimmed the guest list, then nodded vaguely. "Oh, yes, Brad, groom's side. You're early. We've set aside the library for pre-ceremony guests. You can wait there." "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked gently. No, everything's handled. Just relax. We'll call you when it's time to be seated." She didn't wait for a reply. The library was a beautiful room, leather chairs, tall windows, ancient volumes locked behind glass, but it felt like a holding cell. No one else was there. No music, no greetings, no warmth. Just dust particles dancing in the filtered light and the muffled hum of life happening elsewhere. I sat by the window for nearly 40 minutes, watching the arrival of guests from behind the heavy curtains. Black cars pulled up in sequence. Well-dressed people hugged and laughed as they stepped onto the gravel path. I recognized a few, distant cousins, neighbors I hadn't seen in years, but no one came to find me. Eventually, I stepped quietly out toward the garden, my footsteps muffled on the thick carpet, then louder on the stone path outside. The scent of roses and polished wood hung in the air. Sunlight filtered through linen canopies, throwing delicate shadows across white chairs arranged with mathematical precision. I saw them then. Harry, Lawrence, her parents, bridesmaids, and groomsmen, all gathered beneath an arch of white roses. A photographer adjusted his lens, calling out names like a conductor assembling an orchestra. Bride's parents, bridal party, groomsmen, but never father of the groom. I stood just beyond the hedges, trying to remain unobtrusive, waiting for a signal that never came. Harry glanced in my direction. Our eyes met for the briefest second, but then he turned away, smiling dutifully at the camera as Lawrence tugged his arm for the next pose. I slowly backed away. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes like it wanted to remind me I was still real, still present. But presence, I was learning, didn't mean belonging. Guests began to arrive in clusters. Laughter drifted through the air, blending with the soft tunes from a live string quartet. I took my assigned seat at table 14 as instructed. True to the diagram, it was positioned near the catering tent, far from the head table, and even further from the ceremonial heart of the venue. I was surrounded by strangers. Julia's second cousins, a friend of her uncle, and someone who appeared to be the plus one of a business colleague. They smiled politely, made small talk. One woman asked me how I knew the bride. "I'm the groom's father," I said softly. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Lovely." There was no follow-up. I glanced over at the central tables. Lawrence's family occupied the long decorated centerpiece beneath a cascade of floral garlands. Her father was laughing, wine glass in hand. Her mother was adjusting the ribbon on a floral arrangement with practiced flair. Harry sat beside them, a grin plastered onto his face, seemingly unaware of the empty space at his periphery. The ceremony itself was elegant, I will give them that. Lawrence looked flawless in her silk gown, and Harry looked exactly how he always did when performing. Handsome, composed, distant. They exchanged vows beneath the floral arch, read carefully from laminated cards, and kissed to polite applause. I clapped, of course. Everyone did. But mine was the only pair of hands that stopped after a few seconds, as if the moment didn't belong to me. During the toast, Lawrence's father stood first. "We're so proud of our daughter," he said, lifting his glass. "She's brilliant, kind, and clearly knows how to pick a good man." Everyone laughed. Then Lawrence's mother gave a long, teary tribute to our beautiful girl and the new life she begins today with the love of her life. Harry's best friend from university spoke next, followed by Lawrence's brother, who recited a poem he'd written specially for the couple. Not once was I mentioned. My name was not uttered. There was no nod to the man who raised Harry, no toast to the father who funded the celebration, no acknowledgement that I even existed. Harry didn't glance in my direction, not once. I sat there, smiling politely, eating food I didn't taste, surrounded by the clink of glasses and the hum of celebration that moved around me like I was furniture. After the meal, the first dance began. Lawrence and Harry moved with robotic grace to a string rendition of Coldplay. Cameras flashed. The guests oohed and awed. I remained at the table. Max eventually slipped away from the dance floor and came to sit beside me. He was silent for a long time. Then he looked at me and asked, "Do you want to go home, Granddad?" I considered it. I really did. But I shook my head. "No, Max. I'll stay." "Why?" "Because sometimes you stay just to prove you could." Even if no one notices, he nodded and squeezed my hand beneath the linen tablecloth. In that moment, he was the only anchor in a sea of artificial joy. I looked around the glittering room, at the curated perfection, the polished smiles, the golden lights reflecting off wine glasses, and I knew I was not needed here, not as a father, not as a guest, not even as a man. I was an afterthought wrapped in expensive fabric, tolerated for appearances and ignored for comfort. And something inside me began to quiet, not break, not burn, just shift. And in that quiet, a thought took root. Perhaps it's not too late to leave. I stayed longer than I should have. The celebration carried on like a polished machine, each moment curated, every movement rehearsed. The music swelled, guests danced in choreographed bursts of laughter, and I remained seated at table 14, watching a version of my son's life, in which I did not belong. I was sipping a lukewarm coffee, trying to keep to myself, when I heard raised voices behind the marquee, not loud enough to draw a crowd, but sharp enough to prick my ears. I stood and stepped quietly toward the source, behind a cluster of floral displays, toward the catering area. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words came unfiltered. I told him we didn't want interference, Lawrence hissed. And there he is, wandering around like he's part of the family photos. Harry's voice was lower, apologetic. He didn't mean anything by it. He's ruining the aesthetic, she snapped. That suit is wrong. His posture is wrong. And he's sulking in the corner like he's been abandoned. It's pathetic. I stepped back before I heard more. My stomach tightened. I wasn't supposed to hear those words, but they rang in my ears like a bell. He's ruining the aesthetic. The thought of confronting them crossed my mind, just for a moment, but I knew better. Lawrence wasn't the problem. The real betrayal was Harry's silence. Back at my table, I took a slow breath, willing myself to stay calm, to stay dignified. But it didn't matter. Because humiliation doesn't always wait in the shadows. It likes an audience. It came half an hour later during the second round of dancing. I was standing off to the side of the floor near a table of wedding favors when Lawrence approached me. She was flushed from champagne and power, veil pinned high, her dress shimmering under the lights. "Brad," she said loudly, sharp enough for those nearby to hear, "I thought we made it clear. This day isn't about you." I blinked. "I never said it was. You've been hovering, making people uncomfortable. It's supposed to be a joyful celebration," I heard someone gasp. The music continued, a faint, mocking tune behind her voice. "I'm sorry if I've given that impression," I said evenly. "I've only been sitting at my table." Her lip curled. "Then maybe you should sit somewhere else. Or leave. Honestly, it's just awkward." And then she turned to the crowd, to the guests who had paused, to Harry. "Harry," she said, "can we please resolve this?" Harry walked over slowly, shoulders stiff. My heart beat once, hard. Maybe now, I thought. Maybe now he would put an end to it. Tell her she'd gone too far. But he didn't. He looked at me with the same cool expression he used when making business calls. "Maybe it's better if you head out, Dad." It's been a long day. The words didn't hurt as much as the fact that he wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood there, the moment stretching long. All around us, the wedding stopped. A low hum of confusion passed between the guests, but no one spoke. No one intervened. They just watched, strangers bearing witness to my slow erasure. Then I felt Max's hand grab mine. He was trembling. "This is wrong," he whispered. "You didn't do anything." I squeezed his fingers gently. "It's all right, Max." "No, it's not." "Let it be," I said softly. "You still have your father. Don't lose that for me." He looked torn, eyes darting between me and Harry. But I saw it in his face. He understood. Even at 14, he knew the weight of sacrifice. I straightened my suit jacket and gave him a reassuring nod. Then I turned. And I walked. No one stopped me. No one called after me. No one followed. I passed the champagne tower, the guest book, the string quartet. I passed the head table and the golden flower arrangements. I passed 100 people who had all chosen silence. The gravel crunched beneath my feet again. This time, I welcomed it. The sky was turning a dusky lavender, the last light of day slipping behind the estate. My car waited near the rear lot, alone in a line of black-hired vehicles. I opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, and exhaled. Not relief, not quite sorrow either. Something older, something quieter, loss that had finished speaking. The morning after the wedding was gray and bitter. The clouds sat low over the house like a lid screwed on too tightly. I didn't sleep much that night. Just sat in the lounge with the fire cold and the silence louder than usual. I expected silence to follow, too. Maybe a week, maybe more. An awkward text from Max, perhaps. But not Harry. Not so soon. He arrived before noon. No call, no knock. Just the front door creaking open. He still had a key, and his footsteps trailing down the hall. I stood in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea gone lukewarm. He came into view dressed still in wedding wear, just slightly less pristine. The tie gone, the collar loosened, but his face was set in a hard line. "We need to talk," he said. I said nothing, just raised an eyebrow and waited. Harry exhaled sharply. "You left the wedding. I was told to. That wasn't the intention. Then your words were poorly chosen." A muscle in his jaw twitched. Julia's family noticed. "They're upset." It made a scene. "I didn't make a scene," I replied. "I left to avoid one." He crossed his arms. "Look, we still have invoices pending. The live band, the transportation service, the photographer's final cut. I need you to transfer the rest." I stared at him for a moment, and then I said the word I hadn't used in years, not with him. "No." His brows drew together. "What?" I said, "No, Harry. I'm not paying another pound." He blinked. "Don't be ridiculous. You agreed." "I agreed when I thought I was part of this family, when I thought I was helping build something that mattered. I didn't agree to fund a spectacle that treated me like a stain." His voice rose. "This isn't about you. Why do you always make everything about you?" I felt that old familiar tug. Guilt. The instinct to retreat, to apologize. But this time, it didn't move me. "You made it about me when you stood by and let your wife humiliate me in front of 100 people. She was under stress. And you were silent," I cut in. "You didn't say a word. You stood there and watched. And now you want my money?" His fists clenched at his sides. "You've always done this. Controlled everything with your wallet. You dangle support and pretend it's love that once struck. Not because it was true, but because it was so far from it." "I gave you everything I had," I said quietly. "Every step of your life I stood behind you. I gave when I had little, and gave more when I had nothing left, and I never once asked you to pay it back, just to treat me like a father, like someone who mattered." Harry looked away. "And yet," I added, "here you are asking for more, after pushing me out of the one day I thought might bring us closer." He laughed, bitter and tight. "So now you're going to pretend to be a victim? You think I owe you for having a wedding?" "No, but you owe me the truth. And the truth is, you don't see me anymore. Not as your father, just as a resource, a problem to manage, someone to move out of the frame." His face twisted. "You always have to be right, don't you? Always moral, always stoic, always the bloody martyr." "No," I said, calm but firm. "Just tired." "Tired of what?" "Of being used." He scoffed. "Fine. Keep your money, I will." He stood there a moment longer as if expecting me to recant. I didn't. When it was clear I wouldn't bend, he stepped back. "Julia was right. You're impossible, and I'm done pretending otherwise." We stood in silence. Then he turned and walked down the hall. He didn't slam the door when he left. That would have required passion. What he gave me instead was worse. Indifference. I stood at the kitchen window after he'd gone, watching the clouds gather over the garden Megan once tended. I thought of the boy Harry used to be, sitting beside her, counting seeds and singing nursery rhymes. I thought of the man he became, and the one he chose to become. And for the first time in many years, I did not cry. Instead, I exhaled. A long, slow breath that emptied something heavy. Enough was enough. The knock came 3 days after Harry had stormed out. I was at the kitchen table finishing a letter to Max. Just a few handwritten lines to thank him for standing beside me, for seeing me, for reminding me I wasn't invisible to everyone. The knock was not timid. It was sharp, deliberate. A sound made by someone who expects the door to open without delay. When I answered, Lawrence was standing there in a slate gray coat, perfectly tailored, her lips pressed into a practiced smile. Her heels clicked across the tiles as she stepped into my hallway without waiting for permission. "Brad," she said, breathy and performative, "I hope this isn't a bad time." "It's exactly the time you chose." She offered a strained laugh, ignoring the edge in my voice. I wanted to clear the air. "It's been a challenging few days." I led her into the lounge. She sat in Megan's chair, of course she did, crossing her legs with poise and surveying the room like it was on trial. "I've been reflecting," she began, "on the wedding. On what was said." I stayed silent. "I think things escalated," she continued. "Emotions were high. You misunderstood my intentions." "No, I didn't." The smile faltered. She adjusted a cuff. "Look," she said more plainly, "we all had roles to play. You didn't handle yours very gracefully. But I'm willing to move past that, are you?" "Yes, for Harry. For the sake of family unity," I studied her. "And this act of unity includes what exactly?" She gave me the look of someone weary of being misunderstood. "I think it would be good for everyone if we just reset. Pay what's owed, close this chapter, and move forward. There are still vendors who haven't been settled, and the photographer won't release the full gallery until—" "No." The word stopped her. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, voice calm, unmoved. "There will be no more payments. No more support. No more pretending I'm part of something that clearly doesn't want me." Her expression hardened. "You think this makes you strong?" "I think it makes me honest." She leaned forward now, gloves folded tightly in her lap. "You've always held your money like a weapon," she hissed, "controlling everyone with your generosity. Dishing out your affection in pounds and guilt. It's pathetic." "No," I said softly. "What's pathetic is demanding more from a man you publicly shamed just days ago." "You were embarrassing," she snapped, "moping at your table like a child, making everyone uncomfortable. And yet I didn't say a word, didn't disrupt, didn't defend myself. I let you have your show. But I won't fund it anymore." Lawrence stood abruptly. "You'll regret this," she said. "Harry may not say it, but you're pushing him away forever." "He walked away," I replied. "I just stopped following." She walked to the door with a practiced grace, pausing on the threshold. "You'll die in this dusty old house." Alone, I smiled, faint and real. Better alone with peace than surrounded by parasites. She slammed the door. The echo lingered in the hall, then faded. I stood there for a long moment, not shaking, not angry, just rooted. For the first time in years, I had said what I meant, without fear, without folding. That afternoon, I called Mr. Whitcomb, my solicitor for nearly 2 decades, a man of quiet wit and infinite patience. We met the next morning in his oak-paneled office, surrounded by heavy books and the scent of worn leather. "I'd like to revise the will," I said. "Remove my son as beneficiary." He peered over his glasses. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more." "And what would you like to do with the estate?" "Leave something to my grandson, Max. The rest to charitable trusts, health services, education, maybe a shelter or two." He nodded solemnly. "I'll have drafts ready in 2 days." It took less than an hour to change the shape of a legacy. When I returned home, the sky had shifted. Light poured through the east windows in long honey-gold beams. I made tea, sat in the armchair by the fire, and opened Megan's old poetry book. The one with dog-eared pages and margin notes in her delicate hand. Peace didn't arrive with fanfare. It came gently, like a blanket placed on weary shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be loved, or thanked, or seen. I was simply myself. And that, finally, was enough. Letting go of the house took 6 months, not because I lacked the will, but because every stair, every cupboard, every patch of discolored wallpaper held Megan's handwriting in invisible ink. That house was our story etched in architecture. But stories, even beautiful ones, have endings. And this one had been left too long, like a book unread but never forgotten. I sold it to a young couple, Ella and James, who saw potential in its bones. I left them a letter tucked in the kitchen drawer, a list of the best times to plant in the garden, how to keep the attic from smelling musty, and which windows catch the morning sun best. I wished them love and laughter in a house that had seen both. My new flat sat on the fourth floor of a modern building with clean lines and wide balconies. No ivy-covered bricks, no squeaky floorboards, just smooth surfaces and a view of the city skyline softened by trees. I chose it for its proximity to the park, to the grocer, and to the library. I chose it because it had no memories in it yet, only possibilities. The first day I moved in, I unpacked my essentials. A few clothes, a kettle, a framed photo of Megan, and a 10-year-old Harry in front of a windmill in Norfolk. I placed it on the windowsill. Then I sat on the new sofa, staring at the bare walls, the silence broken only by the distant bark of a dog in the park below. No ghosts, no waiting, just space. I brewed a cup of coffee in my new, overcomplicated machine. I sat at my new desk. I opened the refurbished laptop Max had helped me pick out. The blank screen of the blog platform glowed like a lighthouse. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Hello. My name is Brad. I'm 70 years old. I spent the last decade learning how to disappear. Now I'm learning how to begin again." I clicked publish. It received 4 likes that day, 12 by the end of the week. That trickle became a stream. Messages came from retirees in Cornwall, from a widower in Manchester, from a curious teen in Leeds who said, "I wish my granddad was like you." I posted tips on secure passwords, how to find recipes online, how to talk to grandchildren through video calls. I wrote short essays about loneliness, about the ache of being left behind by a world moving too fast. I titled one post, "What the Silence Doesn't Tell You." Every Thursday, I hosted a tech workshop at the local library. The room was small, often too warm, with plastic chairs and a buzzing fluorescent light. But it filled up quickly. Geraldine with her old iPad, Martin who couldn't find his camera icon, Evelyn who was learning to email her niece in Canada. I didn't just feel useful, I felt alive. Then came Rose. It was raining. I was sorting HDMI cables before class, muttering about twisted wires, when I heard a voice behind me. "Still fighting with technology, Brad?" I turned. And there she was, Rose Elkins, my old colleague from the publishing house in Norwich. Her hair had gone silver, her eyes crinkled with time, but she still wore that amused smirk I remembered so well. "Rose," I said, stunned, "I thought you'd moved to Spain." "I did, for a while, but the sun got boring. I'm back." We had tea after class, then lunch the following Saturday, then walks through the park where she pointed out birds I never noticed and told stories about her late husband, her book club, her garden where lavender refused to die despite her best efforts. One afternoon, we sat on a bench by the river. The sky was wide and pale. Ducks bickered near the edge of the water. "I like this version of you," she said. "What version is that?" "The one that smiles without needing a reason." It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something kinder, deeper, an affection rooted in shared years and new beginnings. Rose didn't try to fix me. She didn't ask about Harry or the past. She just showed up, week after week, with patience and a fresh bag of tea leaves. One evening, we cooked dinner in my kitchen. She chopped garlic with a precision that reminded me of the way she used to edit manuscripts. Fast, decisive, elegant. "You know," she said, "I always thought you had a quiet sadness to you." "I did," I said, "but I left it in the old house." Later that night, I received an email from a man in his 80s who had read my guide to online grocery ordering. He wrote, "Thanks to you, I no longer dread winter." I read it aloud to Rose. "You're making ripples," she said. I looked out the window. Below, the city glowed with the slow pulse of nightlife. Somewhere, Max was probably doing homework or laughing with friends. "I don't want to be remembered for the things I endured," I said. "I want to be remembered for the life I reclaimed." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You already are." And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't a man abandoned. I was a man reborn. The invitation came in the post, tucked inside a pale blue envelope with a sketch of a sailboat on the front and the unmistakable scent of lavender clinging to the paper. "Come with me to the coast this summer," it read in Rose's looping hand. "We'll walk the cliffs, eat too much fish and chips, and pretend the world never got so complicated." It was simple, thoughtful, timed just right. I held the letter for a long moment, rereading it while the kettle began to boil behind me. There was no indecision this time, no weighing of what others might think, just a quiet, certain warmth rising in my chest. I wrote back one word: yes. We left in early June. Rose picked me up in her charmingly dented pale blue Peugeot, its glove box stuffed with old maps and boiled sweets. She drove with one hand on the wheel and music from the 60s flowing through the speakers. At one point, she handed me a paper bag filled with warm pastries from a bakery she'd known forever. We stopped along the way, once at a farm stall for strawberries, once to stretch our legs near a field of buttercups. We weren't in a hurry. The world could wait. The cottage was perfect. Whitewashed walls, a sagging roof, 2 bedrooms that smelled of salt and old books, a tiny kitchen with mismatched mugs, a garden gate that opened to a path winding toward the cliffs. From the window, you could see the sea changing moods by the hour, still and silver at dawn, roaring and restless by night. The first morning, we walked down to the beach. I kicked off my shoes and let the cold tide curl around my ankles. It felt like a baptism, into something simpler, freer. Rose collected shells and sang snatches of old songs I half remembered. Days passed in a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Morning walks, afternoon naps, lazy crossword puzzles, pub dinners where no one recognized me and no one cared to ask. Sometimes we talked. Other times, we simply sat in silence and listened to the world breathe. One night, the sky burned gold behind the cliffs as we watched the sun descend. Rose nudged me with her shoulder and said, "You seem lighter." "I am," I said. "For the first time in decades, I'm not carrying anyone else's weight." "You were always carrying too much," she said softly, "even when we worked together." I saw it. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached for her hand, and she let me hold it. Later that week, I taught a small internet class at the village community hall. The mayor's mother wanted to know how to use WhatsApp. A retired fisherman asked about setting up a YouTube account for his boat tours. We laughed more than we learned, but they clapped for me at the end. "Famous already," Rose teased as we walked back to the cottage. "I'll sign autographs after tea." She smiled and looped her arm through mine. At night, I blogged under the soft glow of the desk lamp by the window. My words felt different now, not driven by grief or anger or longing, but by quiet observation. I wrote about the rhythm of waves, the kindness of strangers, the rediscovery of curiosity. "We are not just our regrets," I wrote one evening. "We are also our recoveries." The comments came, as they always did, from people scattered across the country. Many were elderly. Many were lonely. Some simply said, "Thank you." I read them aloud to Rose, and we smiled over mugs of hot chocolate. The memory of Harry came less and less. When it did, it no longer stung. It was just a closed door in a long corridor. He and Lawrence never came around, never apologized, never acknowledged what they'd done, and I had stopped expecting them to. Some people only see what they want, and some never see you at all. They didn't understand the harm they'd done, and that was their burden now, not mine. My gift to myself was release. I no longer clung to the hope of reconciliation. I no longer twisted myself into shapes to be acceptable or accessible. I no longer lived with one foot in the past. My life now belonged wholly to the present, and whatever fragments of future I was lucky enough to hold. The sea reminded me of that. Constant changing, free. One morning in late July, I woke before dawn. The sky outside the window was a soft blur of lavender and coral. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat on the front step. The gulls hadn't begun their squawking yet. The village was silent, the tide whispering its secrets to the shore. Behind me, Rose stirred. She came out wrapped in a shawl, hair tousled, eyes half closed. "You're up early," she murmured. "I didn't want to miss it." "Miss what?" "This," I said, gesturing to everything. "Being alive." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we watched the sunrise together, not saying a word. It struck me then. This was what I had been searching for all those years. Not approval, not legacy, not even forgiveness.